Throughout history, few things have instilled more terror than the thought of being buried alive. It's a fear deeply rooted in human consciousness, one that inspired countless chilling tales and morbid legends. Long before the rise of modern medical technology, mistaken declarations of death were disturbingly common. People would sometimes awaken in coffins, trapped in pitch darkness, gasping for air that wasn't there, left without rescue, without hope. But what if such a nightmare wasn't just the subject of horror fiction? In 1915, in a quiet town in South Carolina, a woman lived through this terrifying ordeal. Her name was Essie, and her experience shattered logic and stunned the entire community. This story, documented and real, continues to provoke disbelief even today. It all began with a devastating error. At the age of 30, Essie suffered a severe epileptic episode that rendered her completely unresponsive. At the time, medical knowledge about epilepsy was limited, and seizures were often misunderstood, sometimes even regarded as signs of incurable disease or worse, unnatural forces. Physicians of the era relied more on intuition than science. Without modern diagnostic tools or conclusive tests, they simply assumed that Essie's still body meant her heart had stopped. That assumption sealed her fate. In just a few hours, arrangements were made for her burial. Her grieving family believed she had passed away. Her sister, who lived out of town, could not attend the funeral in time. Still, she pleaded for one final chance to see Essie. She asked that the coffin be unearthed. What happened next would haunt the memories of everyone present. It wasn't just surprising, it was beyond comprehension. After the doctor's declaration of death, Essie's body was promptly prepared for burial. Back then, verifying death involved only superficial observation. No heart monitors, no scans, no measurements of brain activity. If someone didn't show visible signs of life, they were assumed dead. Because of South Carolina's warm climate and the risk of decomposition, funerals were arranged quickly. Dressed in her best clothes, Essie was placed in a wooden casket and laid out for a wake. Family members and neighbors came to say their goodbyes, believing she had passed peacefully in her sleep. The ceremony was solemn, quiet, filled with sorrow. But amidst the mourners, one key figure had yet to arrive. Essie's sister had received word of her passing, but couldn't reach the church before the burial had begun. She rushed to the cemetery in tears, begging the workers to stop and reopen the grave. Touched by her desperation, they agreed. The workers began to dig. A hush fell over the group as they opened the lid of the coffin. Essie's sister leaned in, bracing herself to see a lifeless body. But what they found left everyone in complete disbelief. Inside the coffin, before dozens of stunned witnesses, Essie was alive. Her body showed no stiffness, and slowly her eyes fluttered open. Her face twitched. Then, astonishingly, she sat up and smiled. Panic erupted. In seconds, grief turned to horror. The mourners screamed, some collapsed where they stood, others ran without looking back. It was chaos. No one could fathom what they were seeing. Just moments ago, they believed they had buried a dead woman. Now she was sitting upright and breathing. In a time governed by superstition, many believed they were witnessing something otherworldly. To them, Essie wasn't just alive, she had returned from the dead. Some saw her as a ghost, others as a spirit of vengeance. One elderly gravedigger dropped his tools and sprinted away. Many in the crowd followed, certain they had seen something unnatural. But in truth, Essie DeMar was not a ghost. She was a living woman, wrongly buried, and now awake inside her own coffin, surrounded by terrified faces. Confused and disoriented, she tried to grasp what was happening. One moment she was in darkness, the next she was inside a coffin, hearing screams and seeing people flee in fear. Her mind reeled. Only her sister remained at her side, frozen in shock, but instinctively reaching out to touch Essie's hand. Her skin was warm. She was breathing. There was no doubt Essie was alive. What had moments earlier been a place of grief now became a scene of frenzy. Some spectators, stunned but curious, crept closer again, trying to understand how this was possible. The question lingered: how could a person wake up in a coffin after being pronounced dead? The explanations seemed impossible. Many refused to believe it was anything short of sorcery or a curse. The fear in the crowd quickly shifted to suspicion. To them, no ordinary person could return from the grave. Whispers began speculations of dark forces of possession. The idea that a doctor could have simply made a mistake wasn't even considered by most. Even Essie herself, struggling to sit upright, had no idea what was happening. Her last memory was collapsing, and now she was at her own funeral. Every move she made seemed to deepen the terror. People screamed louder, yet eventually, the few who stayed began to realize she wasn't dangerous, just dazed and frightened. Her sister held her hand tightly, refusing to let go. Gradually, the fear softened. The truth settled, and Essie had been buried alive by mistake. But even as calm returned, the disbelief never left. At the time, misdiagnosing death was not rare. There were stories, almost urban legends, of others buried alive, but none who lived to speak of it. Essie's case was one of the few known survivors of such a horrific error. The event raised disturbing questions. How many others had been lost this way? How many lives were buried before their time? Essie's return from the grave was not the end of her ordeal, it marked the beginning of a new struggle. Though she had escaped death, she found herself alienated by her own community. Some hailed her survival as a miracle, but others regarded her with dread. Instead of being welcomed back, she became a symbol of unease. She was the woman who cheated death, a title that in a superstitious society was no blessing. Friends and neighbors kept their distance. People whispered behind her back, unsure if they were dealing with a person or something beyond explanation. Even when she insisted she was still the same woman, many refused to see past their fear. They could not accept that someone had returned from the dead and remained entirely human. In time, Essie tried to rebuild a normal life. She resumed her daily routines, kept her head down, and ignored the fearful stares. But one lingering question remained: how could doctors have made such a fatal error? With the benefit of hindsight, we now know that Essie may have suffered from catalepsy, a condition where the body becomes paralyzed with vital signs so faint they are nearly undetectable. Back then, there was no way to identify such conditions reliably. Had her sister not demanded the coffin be opened, Essie would have been lost forever. Her case became a sobering lesson on the consequences of rushed diagnoses. It served as a grim reminder that others might not have been so lucky. Eventually, medical science progressed. New tools allowed doctors to confirm death with certainty, and the risk of accidental burial dramatically decreased. Essie Damar lived out the rest of her days in the same town. Though she endured suspicion and isolation for years, she ultimately overcame the shadows that followed her. Her survival became one of the most astonishing accounts ever recorded of someone mistakenly buried alive and lived to recount it. Even a century later, her story still chills the spine and stirs a haunting thought. If Essie was declared dead and buried, how many others were never given a second chance?